So for those of you that may be unaware, on Thursday evening, Donald Trump, sitting president of the United States, gave the commencement address to the University of Alabama. In that, he obviously made some notes about the Alabama basketball program and Crimson Chaos making their first Final Four last year, as well as making the Elite Eight this year. He talked about the success of the football team, as well as many other athletic achievements of the players and athletes on campus. But additionally, as a part of that, because he was on campus, the person that brought him out to speak was actually Nick Saban. Right? There was a lot of jokes that me and my girlfriend and some other people I know that were making about think about who you have to be to have a speech on the University of Alabama campus, and Nick Saban not be the keynote. It was pretty funny. We were kind of talking about it, but nevertheless, right? Nick Saban gives a little bit of the commencement address before him. He actually had a very funny story that if you have not seen, I would absolutely recommend. I have actually heard it before, but it was an incredible story that was about how Nick Saban, and when they had the national championship in 2017, they visited the White House and got to go into the Oval Office, and Donald Trump was asked about the red button on his desk. There was jokes around, does that launch all the nukes? And turns out that button just fetches him a Diet Coke. So there were some jokes around that were very funny. But, Nick Saban obviously gave some really, really good words of wisdom. Do what you want others. Don't ask of others what you wouldn't ask of yourself. Be the best street sweeper in the world. Some of the Sabanisms that if you have heard him speak, or if you've, read some of the things he's written over the years, definitely some things that hit home and definitely I've heard before, but obviously very, very good to hear them. Really cool to see them in person. But another thing that kind of came out of that is immediately following that, you started to see some discourse by the national media, and not just the sports media, but some of the political landscape media, talking about how Saban and Trump had some discussions around the potential NIL landscape. Now, this is more of just a discussion, right? I am curious on what people's thoughts on this are. Obviously, this is a pretty divisive topic when you're talking about the sitting president of the United States, and Nick Saban, obviously one of the largest factors in college athletics, one of the faces on ESPN currently. But, people are very, very aware of what Saban's views on the NIL landscape are. He's more than happy for the players to get paid, but he's kind of the mindset, does it make sense that the players are getting not just what their name, image, and likeness is worth, right? When you look at how this was actually built, this was built on guys like Javon Quinterly or guys like Destroying, where they had obviously large platforms and they were unable to capitalize on that because the NCAA's policies and the way that they had pre-NIL set up. The NIL obviously allows them to be able to make money, but it has turned into, you're worth what somebody's willing to pay you. And if there's a Lamborghini dealership in Austin, Texas that's willing to pay you $1 million, then that's what you're worth, right? That is not what the original mindset behind NIL was, but that's what it's turned into. Obviously, that's Saban's viewpoint. That's part of my viewpoint. I don't know that we have the exact same views, but I am very curious on everyone's thoughts around this, right? This is a topic that's obviously very hotly discussed when you look at college basketball, college football. This is something that's been discussed a lot. And again, there's a lot of rumblings that maybe Donald Trump and the current administration may step into this. There's a little uncertainty as to what that would look like. Would Nick Saban potentially be helping as a co-author of that if there was some type of executive order or legislation to be introduced? Obviously, there's also the House settlement that's going down as it relates to the ability for rev sharing, right? So there's a lot of things at play. This is not a single-use topic, but there is some discussion as it relates to that, and I thought that was just pretty important. Then it does sound like that was some discussion that was had when Nick Saban and Donald Trump were in the same room together. Obviously, Nick Saban having the president's ear and having to say, hey, this is what I view as the most important thing going on in the space in which I work. Nick Saban obviously caring about the athletes, caring about the players. That is what he wanted to talk about, and that's what you've heard coming out about that here most recently. I am very curious on people's thoughts about that. Obviously, again, not trying to turn this into a political thing by any stretch, but I do think that it relates very, very heavily into the college athletics that we talk about here on the show, whether it be Alabama football, Alabama basketball, obviously both programs being heavily involved in that NIL space, NIL being a huge factor into the players we get, the players we don't get, how Alabama views NIL, whether it be through the things such as like the New Wave podcast that you see with Ryan Williams and some of the things that the university and the standard that they've been able to kind of set up to where you're helping players get their NIL up, whether you are talking about like a Players Era tournament that basketball competes in, right? This NIL space is ever changing, and there's definitely ways that the University of Alabama is looking at it as compared to some other universities. So I am curious as to everyone's thoughts. Throw them down in the comments. So we're going to transition away from that. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the basketball things that have gone on. One player that I previously said was looking like they may come to Alabama a couple of episodes ago. Last episode, I was more like, hey, this is not looking like Alabama's a possibility. I still gave it a reasonable chance. But we'll talk about him committing to another team. Then we're going to go through some scheduling. And then I want to talk, a lot of this discussion in this episode, I want to be about kind of proper expectations for the Alabama football and basketball teams, because I don't think that our fan base has what I would consider are reasonable expectations on a rolling year-by-year basis.